My name is Nora. I'm 24 years old. People often mistake my silence for weakness, but they forget that sometimes silence is just strength waiting for the right moment. It happened at my brother's birthday party. I gave him a watch, something thoughtful, something special. He opened it, looked around, and said, "Trying to compensate because no one in this family needs you?" The whole room burst into laughter. I just smiled, took the watch back, and said, "Good to know." Minutes later, though, the laughter stopped. The whole family suddenly shouted, "Please!" And in that moment, every single one of them realized what I already knew. Things were about to change forever. Before I tell you exactly what happened next, please like this video and comment where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story will remind you that sometimes the people who laugh at you will be the first to call your name when the tables turn. The living room sparkled under soft golden lights, filled with laughter, music, and the smell of vanilla frosting. People crowded around the table, raising glasses, clapping, and calling my brother's name like he was the main character in a movie. I stood near the doorway, holding a small silver-wrapped box in both hands. It wasn't much, just something I'd thought about for weeks. A gesture, really. The paper had tiny creases from how tightly I'd been holding it. My palms were warm and nervous, but I smiled anyway, hoping no one noticed. Caleb was in his element. He always was. He stood near the cake, one hand in his pocket, the other gesturing grandly as he told some exaggerated story about his latest work project. Everyone listened like he was telling a fairy tale. Even my mother's laugh, that soft, proud one, filled the room like music. "All right, everyone," Caleb announced, flashing his perfect grin. "Let's see what my favorite people got me this year." Laughter followed, like it always did when he spoke. He glanced at the pile of gifts on the table, then turned, and his eyes landed on me. For a second, he looked almost surprised. Then the smirk appeared. "Well, look who finally showed up," he said, loud enough for the guests to hear. "Didn't think you'd make it this time, Nora." People laughed again. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I forced a smile. "Happy birthday," I said softly, stepping forward and handing him the box. He took it dramatically, turning it over like it was some mystery item. "You got me something?" he said. "That's rare." "Caleb," my mother said from the corner, half laughing, half scolding. "Be nice." He winked at her. "I'm always nice." The paper tore easily in his hands. He opened the box and lifted the watch. The room quieted just a little. The silver frame caught the light perfectly. Black leather strap, sleek and elegant. It was simple, but it had meaning. "That's actually nice," Aunt Clara said. For a heartbeat, Caleb looked at it quietly. Then he looked up at me, eyes sharp, grin growing. "Trying to compensate," he said, voice loud and mocking, "because no one in this family needs you?" It felt like time froze. The room burst into laughter, loud, cruel, echoing off every wall. Uncle Ben nearly choked on his drink. My mother covered her mouth, shaking her head, hiding her smile. And I just stood there, frozen, the sound pressing down on me until I couldn't tell if my chest was aching or empty. Caleb looked proud of himself, amused, glowing in the attention. He had always known how to make everyone laugh, even if it meant making someone else small. Something inside me, something quiet and tired, decided to stop letting it happen. Without saying a word, I stepped forward, reached out, and took the watch from his hand. "Good to know," I said. My voice didn't shake. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like glass breaking. The laughter stopped. For a few seconds, no one moved. The room felt hollow, heavy with the silence they'd all helped create. Someone mumbled, "Oh, come on, Nora. It's just a joke." But no one laughed this time. I turned and started walking toward the kitchen, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I could still feel their eyes on my back. Caleb's smirk fading into confusion, my mother's smile gone stiff. And then it happened. A sudden crash. A sharp sound of glass shattering against tile. My mother gasped, her voice breaking. Richard? I turned just in time to see my father's glass slip from his hand, his body stiffen, and his knees buckle. He hit the floor before anyone moved. Dad! My mother screamed, her hands trembling. Someone shouted, please! And just like that, the laughter that had filled the house moments ago vanished, replaced by the sound of fear. Caleb stood frozen, the broken pieces of the moment lying at his feet. And for the first time that night, every single face in that room turned toward me. 2 weeks earlier, my phone buzzed just as I was finishing lunch at work. It was a message from my mother in the family group chat. Mom, don't forget Caleb's birthday dinner. Saturday, 7 p.m. Everyone's coming. A second later, Aunt Clara replied with a row of heart emojis, followed by, wouldn't miss it for the world. I scrolled through the chat quietly. They were already planning the decorations, the food, the guest list. My name didn't appear again. Not once did anyone ask if I could make it. It was just assumed I'd show up, or maybe that I wouldn't. Neither option seemed to matter much. I locked my phone and stared at my half-empty coffee cup. I hadn't been to a family gathering in months. Work had been my excuse, but the truth was simpler. I just didn't like how it felt to be invisible in a room full of people who were supposed to see me. Still, something about that message lingered. Maybe it was the way my mother said everyone's coming, like it would be a sin not to. Maybe I just wanted to stop feeling like the outsider in my own family. That evening, on my way home, I stopped by a small shop I'd never noticed before. The display window was lined with watches, gold, silver, leather bands, elegant designs. I went inside. The shopkeeper smiled politely. Looking for something special? I hesitated. It's for my brother, I said. His birthday. He nodded and pulled out a few options. My fingers brushed over one in particular. Black leather strap, silver rim, minimal design. It looked timeless, quiet, strong. That one, I said softly. He'll like that. But truthfully, it wasn't about whether he'd like it. Years ago, when we were kids, Caleb used to borrow my old broken watch and joke that he'd wear it when he became someone important. He never gave it back, of course. I figured maybe this was my way of closing that chapter, of giving him something that meant peace, not competition. When the shopkeeper handed me the box, it felt right. I didn't even check the price. The next few days passed in a blur of second-guessing. I rehearsed how the evening would go. I'd arrive early, wish him well, maybe share a laugh. It didn't have to be perfect, just civil. But every time I imagined it, I remembered how it always went before. The teasing that crossed the line, the jokes about my boring job or quiet life, and my mother's soft laughter that said, he doesn't mean it. Still, I convinced myself this time would be different. Maybe we were older now. Maybe he'd changed. The morning of the party, I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress. I kept it simple, pale blue, my favorite color. I didn't want to stand out, just to fit in without feeling like I was pretending. Before leaving, I opened the small silver box again. The watch glinted under the light, perfect and still. I smiled faintly and whispered to myself, let's try again. The drive to our parents' house felt longer than usual. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I turned into the familiar street lined with trees. I could already see cars parked outside, family, friends, neighbors. The sound of laughter carried all the way from the front porch. I took a deep breath before stepping out of the car. Inside, the house looked the same as always, crowded, warm, and filled with voices that blended into one another. My mother was fluttering between rooms, directing everything like she was running a show. When she saw me, her eyes widened in surprise. "Nora, you came," she said, smiling, but it sounded more like relief than excitement. "I said I would," I replied, forcing a smile. She hugged me briefly, then turned to check on the oven. My father gave me a nod from the sofa, and Aunt Clara called from across the room. "Look at you. You finally escaped work for once." Everyone laughed. I smiled, because that's what I always did. Smiled and stayed quiet. Caleb arrived a few minutes later, his usual confident stride, a crowd of friends following him. He looked effortlessly perfect, Tailored jacket, easy grin, charm in every step. The kind of person who belonged exactly where he was. He glanced at me once, then turned to greet everyone else. I didn't take it personally. I was used to it. As the evening went on, the noise grew louder. The teasing started, just like it always did. Small, harmless jabs that slowly turned sharp. Every time I tried to join the conversation, it twisted into laughter at my expense. And still, I held on to the little box in my bag, waiting for the right moment, believing foolishly that one small act of kindness could change years of distance. That moment would come. But when it did, it wouldn't heal anything. It would break everything open. By the time dinner started, the house was glowing. The table shimmered with candles, laughter, and plates too full to finish. My mother moved around proudly, serving everyone, making sure Caleb's plate always had more than it needed. My father sat quietly at the head of the table, smiling as if everything was perfect. I sat near the end, not far enough to be excluded, but far enough to be forgotten. That's how it usually went. Caleb was in his usual spotlight. He talked loudly, his stories stretching farther than the truth, and everyone loved it. He had this charm, this ability to make his smallest achievements sound grand. I used to admire it. Now, I just listened and smiled when expected. At one point, Aunt Clara leaned forward, wine glass in hand, and said, "So, Nora, what have you been up to? Still working at that little office?" "It's an architecture firm," I replied politely. "Oh, right," she said with a laugh. "You always liked the quiet things, didn't you?" The others chuckled softly. I smiled. It was easier than correcting her. Caleb grinned. "You know, Aunt Clara, Nora's actually really good at what she does. She designed that office she works in. Not bad for the quiet one, right?" For a second, I was stunned. Compliments from him were rare. But before I could thank him, he added, "Though I still don't get how she survives in that cubicle world. I'd go insane without people to talk to." Laughter again, louder this time. Even my mother laughed, shaking her head. "Not everyone needs attention like you, Caleb," she teased. He raised his glass. "True, but attention keeps me alive." Everyone clinked their glasses. I kept mine down. The smile on my face stayed, but it felt heavy. Mia, one of Caleb's friends sitting across from me, noticed. She had been quiet most of the night, polite but distant. Now she leaned closer and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded. I'm used to it. Her eyebrows knitted. "You shouldn't have to be." That single sentence hit me harder than I expected, maybe because no one in my family had ever said it before. The next hour passed like a performance. Laughter, wine, and endless stories about Caleb's job, his new apartment, his upcoming projects. Every topic led back to him. Every compliment landed at his feet. I didn't blame them, not really. He had always been the golden one. Even as kids, our parents believed he could do no wrong. When we fought, I was the one told to be mature. When I achieved something, it was nice. When he did, it was extraordinary. And yet, sitting there now, I realized I didn't want their approval anymore. I just wanted peace. When dessert was served, my mother clapped her hands. "All right, time for presents," everyone cheered. Caleb looked pleased, sitting taller in his chair. I reached into my bag, my fingers brushing against the small silver box. My heart thudded once, slow and heavy. The gifts came one by one: cologne, a jacket, a bottle of imported whiskey. Each one earned a joke, a smile, applause. Then it was my turn. I stood, walking toward him slowly, the box in my hand. Caleb raised his brows, a half smirk already forming. "From you?" "Well, this should be interesting." I smiled softly. "Just open it." He tore the paper easily. The room leaned closer as he lifted the lid. The watch shimmered under the light. For a moment, no one spoke. "It's beautiful," Mia whispered. Caleb turned it over in his hand, admiring it. Then, as if he couldn't stand the silence, he looked straight at me and said, "Trying to compensate because no one in this family needs you?" The laughter that followed was cruel, echoing against the walls. It was the kind of laughter that said, "We've done this before, and you'll take it again." But I didn't laugh this time. I just stared at him, feeling the world around me blur. My heartbeat faded beneath the noise, and for the first time, something inside me stopped caring about what they thought. That was the moment, small, quiet, but sharp, when everything in me changed. And when I finally opened my mouth to speak, the words were calm. They were the start of everything that would follow. For a moment, no one moved. My words hung in the air, calm, quiet, yet heavy enough to pull the laughter out of the room. Caleb's grin faltered. My father looked up from his plate. My mother's smile froze. I hadn't even realized I'd spoken until I saw everyone staring. "You think no one needs me," I said softly, my hands trembling just enough to notice. "But maybe that's because you've spent years convincing me of it." A murmur rolled through the table. Caleb's jaw clenched, his pride flickering behind his smirk. "Come on, Nora. It was just a joke. Don't make it a thing." "A joke," I repeated. "Right, like when you called me the family ghost at Christmas, or when you told Mom I'd probably end up alone because no one would survive my silence." My mother's fork clinked against her plate. "Nora." "No, Mom." I looked straight at her. "You always told me to keep the peace." So I did. Every single time. But peace shouldn't mean letting everyone walk over you. Caleb laughed, a single, uneasy sound. "You're being dramatic." "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Then maybe tell me what's funny about humiliating me every time we're in the same room." The silence after that was thick. My father shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between us. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Caleb stood up, his chair scraping the floor. "You're ruining my birthday." I almost laughed, the absurdity of it, the perfect irony. "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm just done pretending everything's fine." He leaned forward, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Because you got some boring job and live alone in that tiny apartment?" My mother gasped softly. "Caleb, that's enough." But he wasn't listening. He never listened. "You act so quiet and perfect, but you've always been jealous. You can't stand that people actually like me." That was the last thing I remember before it happened. My father slammed his hand on the table, sending a wine glass tumbling. "Enough!" he shouted. The glass shattered, red spilling across the white tablecloth like a wound. Everyone froze. Dad stood up, breathing heavily, his face pale. "This family," he said, his voice trembling, "has lost all sense of respect." He pointed at Caleb. "You, always mocking, always loud." Then at me. "And you, holding everything in until it explodes." He clutched his chest suddenly, staggering backward. For a second, I thought he was just angry. But then his hand tightened, his breathing quickened, and before anyone could move, he collapsed. "Dad!" I screamed. Chairs flew back. My mother rushed forward, panic in her eyes. Caleb froze, his face drained of color. Mia jumped up, fumbling for her phone. The sound of my mother's sobs filled the room, sharp and desperate. "Call an ambulance," she cried. "Now!" I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands shaking. His skin was clammy, his eyes half open. "Dad, please," I whispered, tears spilling freely now. "Please stay with me." For a moment he looked at me, really looked. His lips moved faintly, and I caught the whisper of a word. "Sorry." Then his hand went still. Everything blurred. Voices echoed around me, distant and frantic. Sirens, crying, footsteps. But I couldn't move. The same family that mocked me minutes ago was now a blur of panic and regret. And in the center of it all, I just knelt there. My father's watch glinting on the table, half soaked in spilled wine. The gift that started it all. The night Caleb's laughter finally stopped. The night everything changed. The hospital smelled like bleach and rain. I sat in the hallway, staring at the faint reflections of fluorescent lights on the floor. The sound of distant footsteps echoed, muffled under the hum of machines. It had been hours since the ambulance brought us here. Hours since they took my father behind those glass doors and told us to wait. The clock on the wall said 2:47 a.m., but it could have been any time. Everything had blurred together. The sirens, the panic, Caleb's shaking hands. My mother sat beside me, her fingers knotted around her necklace, whispering prayers under her breath. She hadn't spoken to me since we got here. Not a word. Caleb was standing by the window at the end of the hall, his back turned. The same brother who could fill a room with laughter now looked like a shadow, still, silent, small. I could hear the doctor's voice from earlier, the words that didn't sound real. We did everything we could. I'd heard them in movies before. They never sound as final until they're meant for you. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I'd already cried everything out at home, holding my father's hand as the paramedics tried to bring him back. What was left now was something colder, something that didn't move. A nurse walked by and gave me a soft look, the kind you give someone you pity but can't help. I nodded weakly, pretending it helped. After a long while, Caleb walked over and sat on the bench across from me. His hands were trembling, his eyes red. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance in his face, just guilt. "I didn't mean it," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He rubbed his palms together. "You know that, right? I was just being stupid. I didn't mean any of it." I looked at him, really looked, and realized he was breaking. The same brother who'd always seemed untouchable was now holding himself together with shaking hands. "I know," I whispered. He exhaled shakily, like the words hurt to hear. "Dad was proud of you, you know. He told me once. Said you remind him of himself when he was younger. Quiet, but strong." I blinked, surprised. "He said that?" Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah, he said you were the one who saw things clearly. That someday, we'd all realize that." For the first time that night, something inside me cracked open, not from pain, but from understanding. My father's last word, the faint whisper I heard before he went still, "Sorry," wasn't just for what happened that night. It was for all the years before it. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy, but real. Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Your father loved you both," she said, looking at me with eyes full of tears. "He just didn't always know how to show it." I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. Outside, dawn was beginning to break. Soft orange lights spilling across the windows, brushing over our tired faces. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the waking city. The world kept moving, even when ours had stopped. Caleb came and stood beside me. He looked different, quieter, smaller, but maybe finally human. "What are we going to do now?" he asked. I looked down at my hands. The watch, the one I'd taken back, sat there, its silver frame catching the new morning light. I fastened it around my wrist. "We start over," I said. Caleb nodded, his eyes wet. And for the first time in years, we stood there together, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as two people trying to find forgiveness in the ruins of what used to be a family. The hallway was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't hurt. It just meant something had ended. And maybe something else had finally begun. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more.